Thank you for making time to learn about CARES funding. I will review CARES current revenue sources for this training. I will not cover the expense side of our budget. CARES fiscal year runs on a May 1 to April 30 timeline. CARES budget has a few components driven by the needs of our community partners. In addition to revenue used for CARES staffing and operations to execute community programs, CARES is paid an administrative fee by federal, state, and local governments to manage programs on their behalf, essentially an outsourcing of their programs to CARES. This revenue, used to reimburse other agency activities, is referred to as flow-through or sometimes pass-through funds. The third revenue component is the COVID relief funding. Similar to flow-through funds, CARES receives funding from municipalities to administer these programs to homeless service agencies. This slide shows the amount of funding CARES receives directly for its staffing to operate these COVID relief programs. CARES budget, although not diverse in the number of funders, is extremely secure because approximately 2/3 of the funding is for federally required programs that must be in place for the community to receive any HUD homeless program funds. Currently, 67% of CARES total budget is for these required administrative programs, including 2% for coordinated entry, 34% for the Homeless Management Information System, 25% for planning, and 6% for the United Funding Agency program located in our Finance and Operations unit. CARES funding portfolio consists of 359 contracts. CARES is responsible for executing these contracts, reviewing and paying all submitted vouchers tied to these contracts for both CARES costs as well as the subrecipients who CARES serves on behalf of other entities, and we monitor these programs. Of the current contracts supporting CARES staff and operations, 52% are with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, 20% are with the New York State Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance, 20% are with local counties and cities, and 8% fall into the other category. CARES CFO and Executive Director pay close attention to the agency's time-limited funding resulting from federal relief funds for COVID-19, known as the CARES Act. These funds are used to pay for staff and rent to prevent eviction and to move people out of homelessness into permanent housing quickly. This slide shows the percent of COVID relief funding and permanent funding for CARES. Currently, 20% of CARES budget is from the COVID relief program, which will term September 2022. The staff hired with this funding have contracts that term when the funding terms. The COVID funding supports the extra staff and related work in our contracts team and the HMIS team, because all programs getting this funding must enter data into the Homeless Management Information System. The graphs on this slide show that the only units that receive COVID relief funding are the HMIS and Finance and Operations unit. Planning, housing, coordinated entry, and special projects receive no COVID relief funding. CARES growing revenue is the administrative funds received to take on the full administration of HUD-funded programs on behalf of government entities. 75% of CARES' $13.7 million budget are pass-through funds for which CARES manages, including preparing and executing subrecipient contracts, monitoring the programs, reporting on outcomes, and reviewing and paying all the vouchers for the programs. Managing pass-through funding on behalf of government entities is a growing business for CARES. CARES pass-through funding consists of both permanent and temporary relief funding. Pass-through funding falls into the following program types. The United Funding Agency Program, also known as the UFA. CARES is the collaborative applicant, applied for, and with community support, was designated as the UFA for both Albany and Rockland continuums of care. In this role, CARES applies for, receives, and distributes funding for all homeless projects in the continuum of care. For this work, CARES receives a 3% administrative fee of the total funding coming into the community. This slide is a good visualization of the two paths funding comes into the community, the continuum of care, with and without the role of United Funding Agency. The left side shows HUD contracting and funding agencies directly in the continuum of care, with the collaborative applicant only serving in a planning role. The right side shows how HUD contracts with and funds only one entity with the community funding, the UFA or CARES, and CARES holds the individual contracts with the agencies and reimburses them for their activities. This funding model creates additional work for the finance and contracts unit. Other pass-through funding in CARES portfolio are the COVID relief funds, for which CARES administers on behalf of Albany, Schenectady, and Columbia counties. For the City of Albany, CARES has historically administered its HUD funding for housing opportunities for persons living with HIV/AIDS, or HOPWA, which is a rental assistance program in the Capital Region. And finally, CARES administers funding donated by CDPHP to the community to provide rental assistance to prevent eviction. This table shows the amount of funding for each of CARES programs in order of amount. HMIS is CARES' largest funded program, with planning a close second. Coordinated Entry is CARES' newest program in its portfolio and realized additional funding during the fiscal year as more continuums of care are recognizing CARES' value and helping them administer this new required HUD program. In summary, with the funding CARES receives, it serves over 37 counties across New York State. Of our funding, 51% comes from HUD, 21% from New York State Office of Temporary Disability Assistance, 19% from local funders such as cities and county governments, and 9% from other funding sources. Of our current budget, 80% of the funding is recurring, while 20% is temporary COVID relief funding, which will expire in September 2022. All of this funding is included in over 359 contracts for which we manage. I hope you found this information helpful. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. Thank you again for your time.